Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stalwart series at Finacle Institute. It is our privilege today to host Rajesh Pherwani sir from Create. Rajesh sir has more than 25 years of investment industry experience, and we are here to learn from him, from a ground up approach on how to go about taking a look at pharmaceutical sector. Now, without any further ado, over to Rajesh sir. I would request every participant to direct the questions through me, so I'll be able to moderate those questions properly. And just generic set of instructions, please keep yourself mute on at all times. Over to you, Rajesh sir. It's a privilege to have you here. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Elish. Thanks to the Pinnacle team who arranged this session. It's my privilege to be here. Let me just share the screen and then I'll start the whole session.
Yes, sir.
Can you see the screen? Can you see the PPT?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible, sir.
Yeah, okay. I just present, right. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about the life sciences and intermediate sector, and this is a sector that is very close to my heart. I've been covering this sector for the last 25 years. And this is not a presentation to tell you how a business is run, but it is a presentation to tell you how to identify good businesses within this sector. What are the attractive variables in the sector? How do you identify good companies? What are the right things to do? And what are the kind of companies that you need to look at when you're looking at it from an investment perspective? So what is this sector all about? Basically, there are companies which are into pharmaceuticals and in intermediates of pharmaceuticals, as well as the specialty chemical sector. Most of these products are all interlinked. If you start from the chemical stage to the intermediates, that's the API, that is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, that basically leads to the action in your body when a medicine is given to you. The active pharmaceutical ingredient is the one that actually cures the disease. And then you have a formulation, which is finally sold in the market. So you have to formulate the API and then sell it in the market in the formulation format. So these are companies which are fastest growing companies, I would say, within the overall gamut of the overall industry, because typically healthcare is a segment which needs attention all the time. I mean, there is increase in health issues all over the world. In India, especially, we are seeing a huge increase in health issues, especially lifestyle diseases. And the growth in the industry will continue to happen for the next many, many years to come. Whether the economy goes up or down, it doesn't matter. Specialty and agrochemical sectors are also allied sectors which also have a long-term sustainable business model. And the size of the opportunity is so big for Indian companies that today, compared to the global industry, which is in trillions of dollars, I think some of the Indian companies are still very minuscule, even though they have grown to a few $billion in size. It is important to also look at these companies from a part of the portfolio perspective, because if I'm looking at an overall industry exposure to Indian markets, then one can't ignore healthcare today. It's a very, very important portion of the portfolio, especially when you looked at a situation during COVID when people were unable to even get medicines. I think healthcare sector played a very, very important role in the overall scheme of things during the COVID period. China is one angle that is just shaping up. China's costs are going up, and China is also creating a lot of issues in terms of its own geopolitical situation. So China plus one is a very emerging theme. Biosecure is also kind of making sure that Indian companies get benefited and Chinese companies do not get those kinds of contracts that they've been for many years. Also, another thing that the sector entails is the practical nature of the sector. I think there's some crosstalk here, so do you want to ask some questions? So again, just going back to that point, this is a counter-cyclical sector, which means that what happens is that if the economy doesn't do well, then still this sector continues to do well. We can still see these companies showing good growth in terms of their overall sales and margins. Even in an economy which is very bad, and even in a recession, you'll see these companies do extremely well. So that is why this is a counter-cyclical sector. It's a good, I would say, balancing factor during bad markets. What is the edge of the pharma and intermediate sector? One is it is focused on innovation. Innovation is a core hallmark of the sector. The second is, as I mentioned, China cost increases, and the production in China is also declining because of the cost increases there. So that benefit is coming to India, and that's called as China plus one. It is nomenclature being used nowadays. The next is the promoters in the sector are highly technocrats. So basically, they are all from high-end institutes. The opportunity of the market is huge, which I've already mentioned. The size of the Indian companies is very small compared to the opportunity in the market. These are high margin, high ROE businesses. Absolutely. I mean, most of the products that Indian companies are launching are very high margin. This also entails a multi-year sales growth. Every company is growing at 15 to 20% and above. Every year they are churning out products. Every year you have new products being launched at high margins, and that growth is not only reflecting in the sales, also reflecting in the bottom line. And many of these smaller companies in the 2000s, early 2000s, when I used to cover these sectors, have become large caps today, and many of the smaller companies today will become large caps of the future. So one cannot ignore these companies. What has the pharma sector done over the last 20, 25 years? I mean, you look at the red line, and that's clearly telling you what it has done. A 1 crore investment in the sector, in the healthcare sector, has given you a 10 crore corpus today in the last 15, 20 years. Whereas a 1 crore investment in the Sensex has given you 4.5 crores of value today, which is about 2.5 times of what you would have made if you had invested in the broader market. So it just tells you that healthcare is something, pharma is something that one cannot ignore. Even the next 20 years, if you invest in some of these companies, I think you can create a lot of wealth. So there's a huge growth potential in this market. And a lot of the Indian companies are benefiting from the generic story in the US. I mean, if you've seen the last 20, 25 years, you must have heard that Indian companies are launching products in the US, and they become export hubs for a lot of even innovators under contract manufacturing. So because of all this sector has been doing extremely well. Again, to highlight what happened during bad times. So in 2008-9, there was a subprime crisis, and the market went down the Sensex went down 45%, whereas the BSE Healthcare Index did 20% negative returns. So you can see a sharp relative outperformance of about 25% in that year. Second, if you look at 2010 and 2012, between that period also, the healthcare sector did 20% return versus Sensex of minus 5%. And obviously, we know what happened during COVID. In fact, during COVID, some of these companies actually went up 4-5 times when the market was actually crashing. So even our fund did 30% returns in a market which was down 30%. So it tells you a very important aspect of this sector, where the market let's say the market is at a peak. And what do you do now? In a market which is at a peak and valuations are at the peak, probably switch to a defensive sector like pharma. And it's actually not a defensive because it's growing so fast. So the defensive is a nomenclature. However, it is a portfolio which will give you protection during bad times. In fact, create returns during bad times. It is highly dependent on non-discretionary spends, which means that the patient does not have the ability to cut spends on healthcare, where you can cut your spends on luxury items. You cannot cut your spends on healthcare. The other attractive part for Indian companies is a rupee depreciation, and it helps the exports segment a lot. And exports is a significant proportion. I think 50% of the Indian pharma sector is exports. So that is a big plus if the rupee depreciates for Indian companies. And obviously, they are very, very strong companies with strong balance sheets. Very strong free cash flows. The asset turnover on the business is about 1.5-2 times, but at the same time, the margins are so high that a lot of the profit goes to the free cash, and that free cash can be utilized to again reinvest in new opportunities. What are the segments in pharma? Typically, a pharma sector has 4 segments that Indian companies operate in. One is generics, the other is branded generics, the third is contract manufacturing and custom synthesis, and the fourth is APIs. So generics, what are generics? Generics basically are products or medicines where you don't have brands and we don't have a brand name. These are sold under the chemical name. For example, fluoxetine is a generic name for a product. And if you look at, say, Sun Pharma launched a product called tildrakizumab, which is a generic name, but this brand name is Illumia. So what happens is that in a market like US, where you have specialty products being sold, most of these products are sold in the name of a brand. So Eli Lilly will launch a product in the name of a brand, and that brand will sell till the time the brand is existing in the market. But if there is a patent expiry of that molecule, then a generic company can launch the generic, that is the API name, in the market at a much lower price and sell the same product. And that's the benefit that US has given to a lot of companies, even the obviously the retail users of medicines, through the Hatch-Waxman Act in 1984, and that basically laid the foundation for generics to enter in a big way. There is something called Para 4. I'll come to that later on, but the generic companies in the US are able to launch products at much lower prices and at the same time compete with the brands. And that has become a big part of the market. I think 90% of the market in the US in terms of prescriptions is generics today. Although, it's a reverse, 80% of the market is branded and patented in terms of value terms. What are branded generics now? Companies in India and countries like India and say the smaller third world countries have a different market. They do not have the US kind of market where patented and products coexist with generics. In India and countries which are third world countries, you have a branded generic market. So we are not launching any product in India through our own R&D. We are launching products which have been already launched globally, and we are just copycatting them in India and launching it. So we don't have our own R&D. We don't spend $1 billion on R&D in India because we don't have the budgets and we don't have the resources to spend on R&D. So we launch branded generics in India, and that is a market that's existing. Most of the products in India are original as well as copy generics of non-original brands. And most of the things that we buy in India are all non-original brands as well as original brands selling in a generic format, where there is no patent, probably there's no patent per se acting on it. So anybody can launch. And that's the reason why you have multiple players in India. The top 20 players probably would not be more than 50-60% of the Indian market. There's a big tail in the Indian market in terms of number of players because the ease of launching is much higher. In India, we are launching generics in the form of a brand in India. And you look at the way the margins in branded generic are in India, I think because of the brand, these companies are able to command higher prices, and because of which the margins also on the gross level are very high. Because in India, the cost of manufacturing is very low. And if you compare it with the generics, margins are very average because there, if you look at it, the prices do not justify the kind of costs which are, for a product which has gone generic long back. I'm not talking about the specialty generics. I'll come to that later on. But most of the generics are at average 50% gross margins, where the branded generics is at 70-60% gross margin in India. Whereas you have selling costs after that. But mostly, if you look at from a gross margin perspective, branded generics are much more attractive than generics. If you look at contract manufacturing, that's a totally different ballgame. It's nothing to do with generics. It's more of a manufacturing for innovators under patent. So what happens is that if an innovator has a drug in the market and it needs a second supplier or it needs a supplier, even a first supplier, it goes to these smaller manufacturers with lower cost in third world countries like India, and they outsource these products at a much lower cost, and they then brand them and sell them at a much higher markup in the developed market, especially the US. So their margins over there are much higher because of the low cost of manufacturing from Indian companies. For Indian companies, the benefit that comes through is that if you're selling a product to an innovator, the price in the US is so high that when they are manufacturing in India at a lower cost, they're selling at a higher price vis-a-vis the Indian market. So the Indian company's cost of manufacturing is so low that they make very high margins even in India. So therefore, contract manufacturing to an innovator is a very, very attractive segment, and very, very few companies in India have been able to launch products under contract manufacturing. There's something called custom synthesis also. I'll come to that next. APIs, as I mentioned, is the medicine that basically acts on your body. It is the main medicine which is acting on the disease and killing the disease. And APIs is a market which is highly crowded. So basically, formulations are sold in the form of generics and branded generics, whereas APIs are just core medicines which are sold to the formulators to formulate. But API market is very crowded and it is a low margin business globally unless the API is very, very complex or not as available or in short supply. So what are we targeting? As in, when I say we, as in I'm talking about us as investors, we prefer to target investable spaces which are high growth and high return on investment. So as an investor, what is important for me? My return on investment, which is return on the capital employed that I have, which is basically the profit that I make from the business divided by the capital employed. And my investable space is up there in terms of the ROI curve. And also it has to be growing. Otherwise, if I have a return on capital employed but it's not growing, then my money that is coming, I'm again redeploying in cash, which is not going to earn me so much. So I need a growth business. At the same time, I need high return on investment. So which are those businesses which are high return on investment in this sector? The specialty pharma generics, which is basically companies in complex generics. First to files, again, this is a category of filing in generics, which I can explain later on. Then there's something called 505(b)(2), which is a category of hybrid generics, which has been given for certain rare diseases. Biosimilars, which is basically a generic for biologics, and certain specialty products, which Indian companies have just started launching. As I said, Sun has just launched a specialty product under patent. What are the other ones where Indian businesses are focused in India? Diabetes, oncology, cardiology. Some of these sectors or segments of pharma are growing because these are lifestyle diseases. They're called chronic diseases because in India, the incidence of diabetes is growing every year. We are the diabetes capital of the world. We have 7-8 crore diabetic patients right now. Oncology is a growing area. I think that is one segment of the pharma industry which is growing the world over. Cancer cases are going up almost every day. And cardiology, as in CVS, is another area which is growing in India because of the lifestyle that we are living. The third segment where we can look at high value is contract research and manufacturing, which I said, where you are supplying to the innovators right from the time the innovator is researching. So in the lab, when that molecule is just one small peck in the lab to the final manufacturing in tons. So you're going from milligrams to tons. And if a contract manufacturer partners with a innovator, right from the lab stage, it gets humongous amount of benefits if that particular product goes to the market, because it is partnering at every stage and supplying the material at every stage. And you look at Divi's has done many of these sort of contracts for innovators and made tremendous amount of returns on it. The next area which is also connected is specialty chemicals, where I think this is a space which may not be directly connected to pharma, but it does supply to pharma, and it is a similar, I would say, characteristic as the pharma industry. So if you look at high-end agrochemicals, again here, even globally as well as in India, there is a filing process which is similar to pharma. And if you can file these products globally as well as file them in India and launch them, in India we have something called 9(3) exclusivity, which is given to new products launched in India. So for agrochemicals, if you're able to file them and launch under 9(3) exclusivity, then you can get 3 to 5 years of good margins. And it's a market which is like a consistent, high growth, sustainable market where you can make returns of 25-30%. Similarly, specialty chemicals, specialty chemistries are there. There's benzene, toluene, fluorine. A lot of these chemistries, Indian companies have fully integrated manufacturing setups, and we have invested in some of them. And we think that some of these plants are so complex that it is very difficult to replicate. And especially with China on the back foot in terms of costs, it's much more beneficial for Indian companies because now they can supply them to global innovators like BASF or Dow and DuPont and all of these companies. Which are the other areas? I mean, there are some smaller areas which we really don't have much exposure to, but we think that they are also adjacent areas where one can look at, like, for example, independent specialty hospitals, say like a cancer hospital or pediatric hospital. Then there are hybrid seeds, which are again those categories of seeds which are GM seeds or sort of crops where you get that special patent for a few years and you can price them very high. And then there's animal health, and then there are vaccines. But where we don't focus on is commodity generics, which are like many players in the market, and these are very readily available. There's a lot of supply. Commodity chemicals, same thing. Domestic businesses, which are very volatile, for example, anti-infectives, which are dependent on seasonal businesses, or trade generics, where you don't have in India. You have something called trade generics, which is not branded, and where you sell through government stores, price them much lower. Even there, the margins are very, very low. And there's some tender markets, like in Africa, you have tender markets where the pricing is very low. They are typically for malaria, AIDS, and all, but you don't make that kind of return in these markets. So what are we looking at in a company to identify the company? One is they should have that R&D in place. Second, the processes have to be pretty solid and complex and multiple chain. They should have access to patents. There should be complexity, as I mentioned, and also operate in some niche products, because niche is extremely important in this segment of pharma. Niche products make you much higher margins than generic products where there's a lot of competition. If you have a very high market share in a product, even if it's a generic where there are many players, but if you have, say, 50% market of that particular product, then you can still make good returns in that product. And obviously, cost efficiency is I mean, obvious variable that you need to have to be able to survive in this market. What has happened to the pharma market in the last 15, 20 years? If you look at it, we've seen a significant growth in the global pharma market, and the reasons are very obvious. I mean, it's a need, and it is never going to go out of fashion. Today, it's a $1.6 trillion industry, and the global industry, I think, is also being pushed higher towards higher growth because of the higher growth in the emerging markets. So we've seen a 3 to 6% growth in the pharma industry in the last 14, 15 years. But again, breaking it up in terms of regions, if you look at it, in 23, the developed market was at a 1.3 trillion, and pharma emerging markets, which is basically, if you look at the bottom, we have Argentina, Bangladesh, Brazil, China, Colombia, Egypt, Indonesia, Mexico, Pakistan, India, Philippines, South Africa, and Thailand, and Vietnam. So these are the pharma emerging markets growing at, say, slightly higher than the developed markets. I think the developed markets also grew in the last 4-5 years, is also because of COVID. But going forward, if you look at it, we look at the developed markets going up by 5 to 8%, whereas pharma emerging markets, and I think India included, would be 10 to 13%. If you see the data that is coming out from IQVIA regularly of the Indian pharma market, which we get access to regularly, we are seeing easily 12 to 15% growth on a monthly basis. So I think pharma in India will keep growing at that rate for a long, long period of time. If you break the products up in terms of, this is basically to tell you what kind of a market is it. I mean, the nature of the market. So if you look at developed markets, the original brands own 80% of the market, because they are the specialty products which are under patent, and they've launched the original branded companies like Abbott or Pfizer or Lilly. All of these companies have launched these products and after researching them and under patent for 15 years. And therefore, the market is very dominant as far as the brands are concerned. And the reason also is that it's a insurance payer market. Whereas in India, if you see, we are in a pharma emerging market, only 28% is original brands and 35% is non-original brands. And all of this mostly is branded generic. Whereas if you see, 80% of the original brands in developed markets is all specialty and not generic. And the reasons are that if in a developed market, insurance companies play a big role in paying for the customers. Whereas in India, if you see, or a pharma emerging market, it's out-of-pocket expenditure. which is basically a problem because Indian customers will not be able to afford very high-end medicines, and therefore you don't have as many patented products in India as compared to, say, a developed country like a US. So if you see, most of the developed markets will have more original brands, and the pharma emerging markets will have original and non-original brands, but again, these will be more branded generics. And then you have very small proportion of unbranded generics in pharma emerging markets, which is called trade generics, which I just mentioned. And the last part is obviously OTC and vaccines, which is also a market which we consider as a part of the pharma market because it serves the same end purpose of curing diseases. So what is the breakup in terms of therapy? As I said, the fastest growing therapy is oncology, which is about 14 to 17% of the in terms of growth rates. And oncology is now a $440 billion industry. I think a lot of the oncology drugs now being launched are biologics, which is a totally different field. But from what has been the traditional approach to medicines, biologics are not chemical medicines. They are from living organisms. And that industry is also growing at a fast rate, but all of that is included in your pharma sales today. So oncology is the largest segment, followed by immunology, which is your medicines which cure the diseases which attack the immune system, like, for example, psoriasis, arthritis, and all of these. Then you have diabetes, which is also a growing area. You have cardiovascular, you have the central nervous system, which is CNS, respiratory, mental health. Infectious diseases are smaller proportion today. They used to be a larger proportion earlier, and the market is now changing to oncology, immunology, diabetes, because that's the way the world is evolving. So the top 5-6 categories of drugs have evolved to become the largest categories over the last few years. And that's going to keep happening. Obesity is a growing disease. I mean, it's actually a disease, but the growth rates are 24 to 27%. So you can see the kind of diseases that are evolving in the world. COVID was a big proportion of this in 2020, but now it is hardly $13 billion. So again, looking at how the market is shaped, the developed market has a higher share of specialty medicines, which are basically catering to chronic, complex, and rare diseases. Whereas the developing markets, like the pharma emerging markets, have a very small proportion of 10 to 12% in specialty medicines. So if you look at the top 10 developed markets like US and Europe, some of these markets have, in Japan, 50 to 60% in specialty medicines. And a lot of these new specialty medicines are in the field of biologics. So that market is much bigger in some of these countries because they have a very strong payer system in terms of insurance companies, the pharmacy benefit managers, and the entire chain of, the entire machinery to fund the consumers of drugs. And that is benefiting these sort of segments over there. Whereas in a country like India, this is not the case because people cannot afford these kinds of drugs over there. So what are generics? Generics are basically off-patent products which do not have a brand. They are generally a very average margin. When I say the gross level, when I say sales minus raw material costs, generics are typically a 40 to 50% margin business, which is not very high when it comes to overall pharma industry. And because they are generics, they are not branded, there is no selling cost. There are no salespeople, there's no selling team, there are no market representatives who go and sell this to the doctor. So if you go to a doctor, you will see some of these MRs, market representatives, coming them and showing them a list of products to buy. In generics, you don't have to do that. They are just non-branded, and the doctors can recommend them without having to meet the companies who are manufacturing them. What are the most profitable segments in generics? Difficult to make products because they don't stabilize. Low competition products where there is not much competition available today. There could be some large companies who have vacated the industry and they're not interested in smaller products. So these become low competition, and whoever has filed can benefit from that. And this typically is a nature of a developed market where generics sell much more than, say, a smaller market like in India. Differentiated delivery systems is another area, which is like, for example, we have inhalers, or we have long-acting products, or some of these products which can be delivered over a period of time, like a liposomal or something that goes into your body and then delivers the product over a few months or few days. So such delivery systems also command a very high margin. And finally, complex products, which are very complex to make. And first to file is an area which I think has evolved over the years. I think if you look at the way the generics industry has evolved in the US, the Hatch-Waxman Act gave a chance to generic companies like Indian companies to file these products under patent and challenge challenge the patents of the innovators. And those who challenge the patents on the first day, or the first to challenge the patents, I would say, get a chance to launch the product under exclusivity. So they are very profitable under exclusivity. So I can explain to you in details if you have a question around it. What is the US generic market opportunity now? If you look at the global market, is a 1.6 trillion market, and global generics market is a $465 billion industry. US as a market would be about $550-600 billion industry, almost 40% of the global industry. But within that, generics market is a $133 billion industry. And if you look at the patented industry is around $400-450 billion right now, out of which $188 billion of drugs are going off patent between 2022 and 2026. So they will become generic. 82% of the sales in the US, as I said, are branded, and so remaining are unbranded and generics. You have more opportunity in complex products, in patent challenges, as well as some of the larger generics, larger innovator products which are growing generic. So that generic industry will keep growing in size because some of these products are at a high price. And when their price declines, it doesn't decline as much as the normal generic or run-of-the-mill generic does. But specialty medicines are also growing, and so the generic market will keep growing over a period of time. The generic market today is obviously concentrated in ROW, which is the rest of the world, which includes India and all these small countries. But again, as I said, that is more branded generic. The US generic market is about $133 billion. It's about, I would say, 30% of the overall market. So what is the opportunity in US generics that Indian companies are getting? So on the right, you'll see a table, which is basically a typical P&L of an innovator versus a generics company. So let's say innovator is Sanofi and a generics company is, say, Sun Pharma. Now, the innovator price is 100, but under patent, that price can be high as 100. Moment the product loses patent and goes to, say, 95% lower than the original price, the price goes to 5 rupees. Okay, but the cost of sales for innovator is 2 rupees, whereas for a generics company, the cost of sales is only 50%, which is 0.5. So the gross profit for a generic company is 4.5 at 95% price decline, which is about 90% margins. That's the benefit of launching generics in the US, because Indian companies are such low in terms of cost of sales, in terms of manufacturing costs, that even if the price declines by 95%, they are able to make 90% margin. A similar thing, you look at a price scenario of 99% price decline, where a company can still make 50% margin. So if an innovator is selling a product in the US and it goes off patent and the price declines 99%, an Indian company launching a generic under off patent is able to make 50% gross margins then. And if you look at some of the other areas where, like I mentioned, complex products, difficult to make, low competition, and patent challenges and all, there the price decline is not even 90%. It is probably 70, 60%, or even lesser. In that case, the Indian companies are making probably almost everything is going to the bottom line. So that's the advantage that Indian companies get when they launch generics in the US. It's a very attractive market for them. Now we move on to branded generics. So branded generics, again, which the generics which sell in emerging markets. Most of these are branded. So in India, as I said, the most of the market is branded generic. these are typically at a very high margin of 50 to 70%. But they still have a marketing and sales expense, which means that if you look at an Indian company, they also have a MR strength, which is a market representative strength, which is going to the doctors and selling these branded generics to them. So there's a cost of MRs. And if you are making a 60-70% gross margins on the product, then your selling cost is also there, and then your obviously other expenditure. Typically, an Indian company makes about 30% margins on Indian business, and especially if you're selling high-end complex products or say products which are in chronic segment, then you probably make 40% margin. Non-chronic has a seasonality, but a chronic has a very stable and growing business. So if you look at the trajectory of a company like Sun Pharma for the last 30 years, how did they become leaders in pharma? Through chronic. And they were at 35-40% margins for a long, long period of time. So this is the most profitable segment. When I say chronic, I'm talking about things like oncology, diabetes, central nervous system, cardiovascular. These are chronic segments. These are segments which will keep growing, because if a person has a cardiovascular issue or a CNS related issue, or say diabetes, that particular person will keep taking medicines for a long period of time. These are long-term diseases. They do not just go away. So this segment is going to keep growing for the next many years, because Indians' lifestyle changes are leading to this segment growing much faster. Our country, as I said, has become the diabetes capital of the world. And there are many more cases of heart problems and all of these allied things, including oncology, cancer. So it is driven, Indian market is driven by chronic therapies. There are some patented products which are being launched by international companies, MNCs, through tie-ups with Indian companies, but there are few. There aren't as many. But that's a very profitable segment. Companies who have market-leading brands and focused on chronic and life-saving diseases or therapies have much higher margins compared to, and return on capital employed compared to the rest of the pack. So typical gross margins are 70%. Operating margins are about 25 to 30%. These are superbly cash flow generating businesses. Very stable balance sheets, consistently growing at 12 to 15%. And the return on capital is about 30-odd%, which is amazing, because we are always hunting for companies which have ROE or return on capital of 30%. Our market is growing. Right now, it's a $27 billion domestic market. There's another $25 billion export market. And I think by 2028, this is based on, obviously, this is based on company projections. We would be reaching $38 to $42 billion. We are growing at low teens to mid teens. What is also another reason why we are growing is because insurance penetration is going up. There are other reasons, but insurance penetration is a very, very important criteria, because it improves the ability of the patient to pay in India, and that is a big, big problem that we have faced for so many years, and that is the reason we have become an out-of-pocket expenditure country as far as pharma is concerned. But if we have a thriving health insurance business in India, then we'll probably see a big, big jump in the overall size of the industry as time goes by. So our healthcare expenditure is still 3% of GDP if you put the government as well as public and private contribution to healthcare. And government is planning to increase their contribution from 2% to 2.5% by 2025. Although we are very, very low compared to global averages. If you look at US is 17% spent on healthcare. As I said, most of these larger ones have a very strong payer system in place, which is the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers. All of these together pay for the drugs that are sold. For example, in the UK, if you are staying in the UK, you do not have to pay anything for anything. So you just go to a hospital and you get treated, you get your drugs, and it's all free. But you are paying taxes and other things in a different way. So that's a totally different system, The hospital industry in India is growing at 17% CAGR. And medical tourism is another area where, if you say the third world countries are sending their people to India to get treated at high-end facilities. And that's also a small area, but it's a growing business in India, which will also contribute to the growth of the industry. A typical Indian company have actually analyzed Abbott, very, very solid MNC in India, where you see sales growth over the last many years, significant sales growth, a sustainable sales growth, and you can look at the EBITDA and operating margins going up. So typically, such companies have thrived in India because they have a very strong product base. Some of their products in gynecology, some of these companies have thrived in diabetes and in cardiovascular diseases, and they have basically been market leaders. So when you are market leader, you end up growing fast, and not only growing fast in a market which is growing, but also you get higher margins, and those margins will give you strong cash flows. So again, it comes down to cash flows and returns on capital. So the next area, which is highly interesting, is contract manufacturing and custom synthesis, which I talked about earlier. But again, where do companies in CRAMS, which we call it CRAMS, make a lot of money and high margins? And that area is selling to innovators during the entire stage, from the first stage of the lab research to the final stage of manufacturing at the plant. So you're going from milligrams in the lab stage uh, to tons, from milligrams to kgs to tons, and the kind of scale up that happens at a very high price for these guys, it leads to significant impact on their top line, balance sheets, and cash flows. And that's the nature of the contract manufacturing industry. That if you are a very good player in the industry, you get recognized and you can become a first or sometimes second supplier to some of these innovators. And when you are a second supplier also, the kind of margins you make is pretty high. So it's a very attractive industry, but very few Indian companies have shown their mettle in this. One of them is Divi's, which has done a great job. Today, Divi's is more than a $1.5 billion top line. Probably at some point, it was not even a uh, 15-20 million dollar top line company when it came out with the IPO in 2007. So supplying to these manufacturers at different stages has its own advantages. What is driving outsourcing? Again, China plus one. Indian companies have the ability to file dossiers. Indians are English speaking, so they can easily file dossiers. That advantage China doesn't have. China does not respect IPRs as India does, patents. We also have a non-compete approach, which means that we do not launch the same products in their market, which we are researching in India. We have low-cost operations. We have ability to timely execute and deliver high-quality products to them. We have very high-quality talent, access to high-quality talent as education and as institutes thrive in India. We can get high-quality talent in this sector. Many of the promoters in the sector are technocrats, so which means that they not only understand the business, but they drive the business the way they think is the right way to drive. So if you look at the global prescription market, now this does not include OTC and all. It has grown from $751 billion to $1.1 trillion in 2023, and of which $100 billion today is the contract manufacturing part of it, which means that this, if you look at the sales of the innovator and the cost out of the cost, $100 billion is coming from contract manufacturing companies. So that's not a bad figure when it comes to the penetration of contract manufacturing companies. And if this keeps growing, if the global prescription market keeps growing, then the contract manufacturing business will also keep growing as fast or much faster, I would say. So this is a simplified version of a scale up, which I've been mentioning in under contract manufacturing and custom synthesis. So typically, custom synthesis happens at the earlier stages, which is preclinical grams, milligram stage in the lab. You have, that's the time when you have this target identification. What's a target? Target is a receptor in the body. So say you have a disease, a receptor is the cause for the disease, or a receptor can cure the disease. So you identify the receptor, you validate the receptor. which is a target, and then you generate a lead. What is a lead? A lead is a molecule which will cure the disease, which is the API. And then you optimize the target and you select the final lead to develop the medicine. Then you start trials. And when you're doing the trials, your quantities go up. So typically trials start from preclinical, animal safety to phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So as you move phases, the number of patients required is much higher. And that is what causes the scale up. So when you're moving from milligrams to kgs to launch, your scale up is happening. Then you file the drug with the FDA and you launch the product and you start manufacturing. That's when you have the commercial manufacturing of the product. And these quantities are in tons. So something which is in grams has now moved to tons. You can imagine the kind of scale up that has happened to the top line of the company which is supplying. So an Indian company which is collaborating with the innovator and supplying a product from the lab stage to the final stage has scaled up the top line from hardly 1-2 crores a year to probably 1,000 crores a year, depending on the kind of product that's launched. But the caveat here is that the innovator has to get the approval at every stage, and the US FDA has to approve the product to be launched in the US. So that is obviously that is a requirement. What happened? Why has outsourcing gone up sharply in the last so many years? Outsourcing has gone up for many reasons. One is obviously China costs have gone up. So companies you used to go to China earlier have come to India. The cost of innovation or cost of bringing the product to the market has gone up to about $1 billion today. So companies want to cut down on costs. They want to cut down on the cost of manufacturing. And it's very competitive out there. So you want to increase your margins. And to increase your margins, you have to go to high quality third world country companies to be able to outsource some of these drugs at probably 30 to 50% cheaper than what they can manufacture in India. So this is just to tell you a typical cost structure of an innovator like Pfizer, which has almost 43% of sales, cost of sales, and 18% is the R&D cost. So you add the cost of sales, which is raw material, manufacturing costs, and R&D costs, it works out to around 62% or 61%. And if I can save on this, my margins can shoot up. So if I look at the operating margin for this company is around 2%, $1.1 billion on a $58 billion of sales. If I can even increase this by 2%, my profits can double. So if I can save my cost by going to a Divi's Labs or an Indian company, then I think it's par for course. The last segment of the pharma industry is APIs, which is the ingredient that actually acts on your body to cure the disease. Although this segment is a very important and core segment for the industry, it is very crowded. And unless you have a specialty product, the API doesn't make you that much money. So if I look at contract manufacturing, you are actually supplying some of these specialty products to the innovator. And that's where your API is making money. You're also supplying API. So that's where the API is making money. However, a generic API in a generic market doesn't make as much money. The only ones which make money are those under patent, or where again these kind of characteristics of difficult to make, or where market shares are high, or where you can have a cost efficiency in terms of scale or of manufacturing. But these are sold almost everywhere in the world. APIs are the core and the heart of the business. So that completes the pharma part, and now I'm moving to specialty chemicals, which also become a part of the chain for pharma in many cases. So the specialty chemical industry today globally is about a $1 trillion industry, but in India it is growing at a much faster rate at around 12% versus global growth rate of 4 to 6%. We are around right now would be about $40 to $50 billion in terms of sales. Here again, China plus one factor comes into play. Power costs in China are going up. Employee costs are going up. European plants are shutting down. So because of high costs. And Indian companies have set up multi-step processes, including plants which are highly environment friendly. So at one time we used to have issues with the environment, but now with the kind of technology that we have imported, many plants are environmentally friendly and they are able to supply to global companies. And most of these companies are also pricing their products on a cost plus basis because Indian companies have a bargaining power simply because global companies do not want to go to China. So because of the cost plus pricing, margins and cash flows are extremely attractive. And over a period of time, they have established relationships with suppliers and buyers globally. At the same time, many of these buyers are using Indian companies to supply them core products under contract manufacturing. So the contract manufacturing angle is working here as well. So typical chain is too complex, but just in a nutshell, this is a benzene product chain where you have different stages. This is a typical manufacturing plant for RT Industries, a very solid player in the chemicals industry. So you start with benzene and you chlorinate it under chlorination. Then you have nitration, and you add ammonia to it, and which is called ammonilysis. Then you do hydrogenation, basically remove the nitrogen and add chlorine to it. Then there are other steps where you get other products, and also you also add helix chemistry where you can do fluorination. So typically in a chain you make so many products, and the chain becomes so complex that it is very difficult to replicate by another manufacturer. And I'm telling you that over the last 20 years, I've seen RT Industries grow from a very minuscule size of 200 crore to today it's $1 billion company. Most of the sales have happened at the cost of China. If you look at the key products like PNCB, ONCB, they are market leaders globally, where China was a market leader in, say, early 2000s. So what have Indian companies done is basically Indian companies have replaced China in many of these basic and highly complex products over a period of time. And most of the buyers for them are innovators. So innovators are giving them contracts for 3 to 5 years, and they are funding the plants. They are setting up the plants in collaboration with the innovators and then becoming core suppliers for them. So this is a very good development for Indian companies. And it's being referred to as China plus one, but I think this has been going on for the last 20 years. You have another segment which is agrochemicals, which is basically chemicals which are used, uh, in farms to keep off pests or keep off weeds. And in India, this is a very old industry, but it is beginning to grow much faster because, again, the same variables are coming into play for agrochemicals that are coming into play for specialty chemicals that are coming into play for pharma. So you have innovators launching products in India under exclusivity. You have Indian companies launching innovator products in India under exclusivity. You have Indian companies filing for products globally, and you have Indian companies supplying products to international companies under contracts. So if you look at the way Indian agrochemical industry has grown, today we are a $5 billion, almost a $5 billion domestic industry, almost a $4 billion export industry. Say in 2013, we were not even half of this. So the growth in agrochemicals is going to continue because if you look at the way products are going off patent, similar to pharma generics, every year $1 to $2 billion worth of products are going off patent. And in India, again, the need for higher crop yield is also pertinent. So Indian companies are going to keep, milking the benefits of that growth. Indian farmers are getting more educated. Again, Indians are providing exclusive market to MNCs to tie up with Indian companies, provide the whole distribution network to launch these products at high margin. And then, obviously, companies are reverse selling the products in global markets under a contract arrangement with some of these companies. So what are the key characteristics that make multi-baggers in these sectors? One is the promoters have to be extremely strong technically. So most of the technocrats have done extremely well in these industries. We also look at corporate governance. Corporate governance is a very important criteria when it comes to investing in companies. Products, again, as I mentioned in the beginning of my slide, you need to have complex products, specialty products, low competition, difficult to make products. Some of these products can make much higher margins versus pure generics, pure vanilla generics. And companies which have more such products have better margins, better cash flows. Customers, again, if you're selling to a generic, then the customer is very average. But if you're selling to an innovator, then you tend to get higher pricing and higher margins. If you're selling in a tender market, the competition is very high. You get lower pricing, lower margins. If you're selling in a branded generic market, in like in India, again, you get high pricing and high margins. So it depends on the kind of customers you're looking at. So you look at customers which give you that high pricing, high margin, or high cash flows. Typically, companies with high market shares in products, those products continue to make high margins versus where a company may not be a big leader and maybe just a follower and getting a small part of the market. Then obviously companies with with a large pipeline and a large number of pending approvals versus products launched can continue to grow because you have a pipeline, you have the ability to file more products, and that keeps replicating a pipeline which is declining in terms of sales opportunity. What are the things that we should avoid as investors when understanding these companies? Now, a lot of Indian companies have one-off opportunities, high margin opportunities which go on for 4, 5 years or 3 years or sometimes even 6 months or 1 year. Sometimes what we do is as investors is we mistake those opportunities as sustainable opportunities and then we look at it as a sustainable profit and we wrongly value these companies. So that is one thing we should avoid. We have to cut them off and show them as a part of the overall sum of parts calculation under a DCF calculation. Then not being able to understand the end customer, obviously, as I said, if you're selling in a tender market, then your customer nature is very poor. Or if you're selling in a highly competitive market, it's very poor. But if you're selling to an innovator, you're able to price higher. Such companies can continue to get sustainably high margins. The quality of the filings, again, connected to the kind of products you're launching. What kind of products are these complex? Are they very specialty oriented products? Are they hybrid products? Are they very generic vanilla products? It's very important. Then in pharma, typically what happens is that every product opportunity has its own trajectory, has its own, say, you can say a DCF or a value. And you cannot just value a pharma company on an overall basis like you value a metals or a cement company. So you have to value a pharma company based on each segment of the business. Every product opportunity gets valued separately, and then you can do a sum of parts valuation. It's better to value a pharma company like that than value it like a plain vanilla FMCG or a metals or a cement or something like that. Sometimes some of these companies also have certain issues with their plants, US FDA violations and all, and managements are very convincing sometimes saying that we do not have violations and we will come out of this very quickly. So kindly, do not ascribe so much value to that. But I think some of the violations can be very, very serious. And if a company is regularly violating the US FDA norms, then it is a red flag. And I think it is better to stay away from such companies because you may see good phases, but suddenly an FDA issue can take away all that benefit. As I said, no two pharma businesses, no two pharma segments are the same. So if you are valuing pharma companies, then you should look at them separately and cannot give a same multiple to pharma companies. Within pharma, you cannot have a homogeneous pack. It is completely different. And therefore, covering one pharma company is like covering multiple sectors. And finally, obviously, look at the cash flows and look at the valuations. I think in our business, the most important thing that one has to look at is free cash flows. And look at the future free cash flows, not the past free cash flows, because that is what will determine the returns for you as an investor. I think that's all from my side, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Rajesh sir, for a very detailed walkthrough. We do have few questions in pipeline. Maybe I'll try to moderate on behalf of the students. Abhiyan, you can type in the question to me on chat. I'll read it out. Sir, the first question from my side.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that in terms of valuations, you don't really value a company in a similar multiple, obviously, because as you mentioned, valuing a pharma company is altogether like valuing multiple industries together. So how do you go about valuing, let's say, a generic drugs business versus a CRAMS business or a mixture? How do you go about taking a look at valuations of such businesses?
Yeah. Okay. So shall I see? It's a very general question. I mean, it depends on the company you're dealing with. Okay, a generics business can be a very good business also, and at the same time, another generics business can be a bad business. I mean, in terms of the quality of the business I'm talking about now. When a company is launching generics, you need to see the nature of the filings, and there's something called Orange Book
Hmm.
on FDA website where you can get all the filings. In the Orange Book, you'll see the kind of filings that are there, and then obviously, see, we as investors need access to that kind of information to understand what kind of competition is going to come in these generics. So, if we think that there are three players going to launch these products in the next 2 years, and these three players are going to have a market of 3 or 5, max 5 people for the next 3 years or 2 years, the quality of the filing is very high, because what will happen is, in a market where there are 3 or 5 players, your price decline is not going to be more than 80-90%. Especially in the first few months, you will really milk it, because it will be a gradual launch, right? You may be the first to launch, or you may be second to launch, you may be third to launch. So you may make humongous margins in the first 2 to 3 years, because when the price declines 80%, and you go back to the slide which I mentioned earlier, where I showed the cost structure for an Indian generic company versus an innovator, we are hardly pittance in terms of costs. So if my innovator price declines by 80-90%, I'm able to make probably 99% margins. So such a portfolio is very attractive, and this reflects the ability of the promoter, or the management, I would say, not the promoter, to be able to identify these opportunities. So you give it a higher value. But a company which is launching products along with Janta, say there are 50 players, 30 players, 20 players, and there are too many players, and the price decline is just a very difficult to make money kind of product. And his whole portfolio is like, okay, I'm a Me Too player. Then obviously that portfolio doesn't get that kind of a value. So it depends on the product filing. As I said, every company has its own idiosyncrasies in terms of its own pipeline. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of valuing these businesses, because you can lose a lot of money by betting wrong. It's not like a metals business, okay, you have a metals HR coil price or a CR coil price, or you have oil company that, okay, Brent is this, and gas is this, and that's it. Okay, what is happening in Iraq and what is happening, okay, we know. But here it's not like that. No macro understanding will help you. Until you understand the pipeline, until you understand what is the competition likely to come in this particular product, you will not be able to value the business. So the 20 years of understanding is very important. And then also need access to those kinds of reports. You need access to the Orange Book. You need access to what the innovators are saying. You have to go to their filings. You have to go to their websites and understand from the annual report what they are saying for those products where this company is filed. That is one aspect. On contract manufacturing, I think it's extremely secretive. I would walk away from an investment if a contract manufacturer comes and tells me that I am working on this product for the innovator. Because the moment he says that even on a con call, the innovator will take away business from it. So we have to depend on track record. We have to depend on its execution capabilities. And we also have to depend on a lot of subtle hints that the management give to us when we meet them. And therefore, in pharma, you cannot invest in companies by not meeting them.
Got it, sir. Sir, in terms of there is always so you mentioned one of the points which you take a look at while investing in a pharma business is R&D, which may or may not always be uh, notified expense, of course. So how do you go about taking a look whether because a lot of these expenses at times have been capitalized, and not naming a particular company, but then the investors of such companies have suffered because of a huge write-off which eventually didn't work out properly. So how do you go about taking a look at whether as a outside investor, whether the R&D is actually going to materialize or probably you think is happening in the right direction?
So track record is very important.
Hmm.
Sometimes, see, typically Indian companies have 7 to 8% of sales as R&D expense.
Hmm.
Okay. And most of the expense is towards filing for drugs in the US. There's nothing else. Very little goes in filing for drugs, say, in other markets, in Europe and all. But bulk of it, if you look at a company which is filing for products, say, they have, say, 100 filings. You take a ballpark figure of, say, 0.5 to $1 million per product filing. So what are the stages for Indian companies to launch the drug in the US? You have bioequivalence, bioanalytical studies, which you do in a very, very small scale. And the cost for each product is, as I told you, $0.5 million odd. So if you have 100 filings, what will be your cost? So you have a $50 million cost or a $100 million cost. But if your sales is $1 billion, that comes out to what? 8%, not 8%, about 7 or 9 odd percent of sales. So typically, one can figure out whether there is too much being spent on wasteful expenditure. See, Indian companies don't have much of a write-off. And for the simple reason that Indian companies don't spend too much on innovation products. They don't spend. Forget about much. The only company which did this was Glenmark in 2008. And they failed miserably. So they did have these write-offs. I don't think that's a concern for Indians as much as what probably is a concern for a global company, which is an innovator.
Got it.
See, under the sea, what is happening, we don't know here. Companies are siphoning off money, claiming it to be R&D, I don't know. But then again, the corporate governance comes into play.
And as you mentioned, track record, essentially.
Track record, corporate governance. How profitable is the business is very important. If it is making 5-10% margins after spending so much on R&D for so many years, then it's a red flag for you.
Got it. Thank you so much, sir. There is one question from our alumni, Gautam Gosar. Gautam, you there?
Yeah, hi, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. So, sir, my question is more specifically on the Indian CDMO market. So basically, it's valued around 15,000 crores and is expected to grow around 13-14% CAGR, driven by factors like increased of outsourcing by the pharma companies and government initiatives like Schedule M, which is helping in consolidation of the industries and shutting down of the non-compliant facilities. So my question is more on the theme, like how do you see this theme playing out, and do you believe like the listed players, the recent IPO which came couple of days back, Akums Drugs and players like Innova Captech and Windlass are well positioned to capitalize the growth uh, in this sector going forward?
No, see, I wouldn't like to comment on stocks, but
Yeah,
I can give you a very broad outlook. As I said, one of the slides which I have shown also, the global prescription market is a $1.2 billion, $1.15 trillion, industry. Okay. And if I look at the CDMO market, which is a contract development manufacturing organization industry globally, is a $100 billion industry. If you look at China, okay, China has been also a big player in that industry. I remember Wuxi, which is WUXI, was a very big player in this industry for many, many years. But with what is happening now, especially with the launch of this Biosecures Act, and the way China has been sort of losing that sort of credibility with developed markets like US and Europe, there is a huge opportunity which is staring in our face in contract manufacturing also. I'm saying this is across the board for Indian companies, but more specifically these industries, pharma and chemicals. And CDMO is a very big part of it because the industry is characterized by I would say patents. And if any company were to misuse the patents and use the data that is given to it during the whole research and development process and launch that product or leak that data, it's a big loss for the innovator. And that is why the level of trust that developed markets have on India now is going up versus China. And more business is going to come to India going forward. That is one angle. The second angle, obviously, is China's costs are going up. So we will also benefit because of that. So if you ask me, the outlook is amazing. I mean, that's the place to be today. But you got to be a very, very high quality player, which respects IPR, which delivers the product on time, which delivers the product at the cost that an innovator needs it, and also make sure that it is secretive about the business it is doing with the innovator. And in India, there are very few companies which are doing that. So as the industry matures, you will probably see more and more such companies proliferating in India. So the growth can be upwards of 15-20% from there.
Sure, sir. So this is really helpful. And sir, just to follow up on this, I agree with whatever you said on the global CDMO industry, how this is panning out. And so, any view on the Indian CDMO industry specifically?
I mean, you're talking about Indian companies manufacturing for Indian companies.
Yeah,
That market is a very low-end market here because Indian companies are only doing generics. So they already priced lower. And then you're selling to them, it's like a toll manufacturing. I think Indian companies supplying to generic companies is not a business. It's a very low-end business.
okay. Sure, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, I had a question. Sir, the way we take a look at Indian consumer market and probably let's say US market, where in India doctors are prescribing not drugs but actual medicines, which eventually, and when it comes to US, it's the other way around, right? So, do you see that changing sometime in India, or like what is your opinion on the same?
So Indian insurance sector has to uh, grow. The health insurance sector. I mean, you ask all of these people over here, how many of them are paying for their own medicines? Mostly everybody is. I think that is going to take time. So what has happened in the US is that the whole payer mechanism is so developed that customers or the consumers, I don't think they think too much when it comes to buying products where the copays are almost 90-100%. So what the doctor does typically is that they write a prescription, and if there is no generic, they have to buy that particular product because it's under patent. But then the insurance company reimburse most of it, and the consumer is taking those plans where they are able to get those kinds of benefits, right? So the out-of-pocket expenditure for a US-based citizen is very low when it comes to these products. And India situation is worse. Now, will that change? Unless the government does something, it's not going to change. Because the way the industry is evolved is that everything is based on out-of-pocket expenditure. And there are very solid, strong brands developed by pharma companies in India today. So I don't want to say anything controversial, but if there is a brand, there's a lobby. And unless the system in India changes, unless somebody the government takes a decision to spend more on healthcare, creates a system, the payer system, and a mechanism for us to go and buy those products. No MNC will launch products in India under patent because of this reason. Because if you launch a product, a pill at 200 rupees a pill, are you going to buy it? छोड़ो यार अभी वो दो रुपए वाला ले. So that's going to happen. So you're not going to make money in India. you will not be able to sell those products unless somebody is paying for it.
Got it, sir. Sir, I had a question just now that US elections are right on the corner. Um, does that really impact as far as the Democrat stance or the Republican stance? Because Indian markets are heavily influenced by or is it that the lobbies usually generally accusably or probably have a neutral stance whichever party comes into the power?
I don't know all these things. What is the stand of Republicans and what is the stand of Democrats on generics and all of that. But I know one thing, that generics are probably 90%, 95% cheaper than the specialty products. And there's a lot of pressure on insurance companies also in the US. So you have two lobbies.
Hmm.
One is the pharma companies, which are making tons of money. Okay. And then you have the insurance companies, which are also looking to earn premiums, but they don't want to pay. So I don't know the intricacies of what's going on at the political level, but I can only say that the generic sector will keep growing because end of the day, people want to reduce, and it's a very strong political rhetoric to say that I'm reducing the prices of drugs. So every government that comes into power will make that one statement.
Okay.
What they do in the background, in the behind closed doors, I don't know. But they are going to make sure that people are able to buy drugs at a cheaper cost. So generics will have a growth, which will continue.
Got it, sir. So there is one question from Shahid. His question is how to analyze the companies which have filed Para 4. He basically wants to understand how we can get high probability that the companies will win the Para 4 filings.
Yeah, that if you can answer that question, then you should be on the legal team of, say, Reddy's or Sun Pharma. No, that's a very tough thing to say. It's very, very tough because you're challenging patents. Okay, there was a product, I'm telling you, where this Indian company lost because the jury was a bunch of 12 kids from a college. Now, can you predict anything over it? It's very tough. These litigations are fought in the courts in the US. Okay. And it's very tough to predict whether a patent is valid or this process is non-infringing. So pharma companies will fight tooth and nail with the money they have through lawyers and legal processes to make sure, because every day they are making millions on that product. A product which is a $6-7 billion product is making you how much per month? You can do the math. So if even 1 month, if a pharma company has a Para 4 challenge to that, and even 1 month earlier, if it can launch, you can see the kind of money that pharma company can make and the kind of money that the generic company can make and the pharma company can lose. It's a big game, and therefore, until the last day of the verdict, you cannot say. So typically, what happens whenever there's a Para 4 filing, the pharma company gets 45 days to respond to the generic company. And after that, you get the 30-month benefit. Anything that happens within the 30 months in terms of a verdict can change the situation. But at least for 30 months, the pharma company is done with the whole threat of generics coming into the market. If the generic company is able to fight its way through and launch even 3 months in advance, it's a win for him. Which means that if he's able to launch it in 27th month, the 3 months that it is getting the exclusivity for is so profitable for him that probably that company will be able to fund its next 20 years capital expenditure. So that is what they're fighting for. Tough. It's very tough to say.
Got it.
But one thing I can say to answer this question is that companies which have proven in the past, you have to go by the track record how they have managed to manage this whole legal tangle of Para 4s, and also get some sense from the market in some companies, let's say even competitors and the likes, to understand are Are the generics in the winning position, or is the innovator in the winning position? There are certain subtle things you can figure out.
Got it, sir. Thank you, sir. So there's a question from Khushi. She basically is looking to seek any publicly available material which you would recommend somebody who is trying to learn pharma sector from scratch and perhaps develop over a period of time. Any investor letters you would recommend or
So
any?
my simple recommendation to Kushi is that please read annual reports. Read the annual report of Sun Pharma, read the annual report of Dr. Reddy's, and see the whole description in the MDNA, the management discussion analysis. You will learn much more than anybody else. First, read those reports from all these companies, the top 10 companies. Just read the MDNA. You will be much wiser and smarter, at least to start with. And then you go to the next level of looking at, there's a lot of research available. If you have access to, say, some good research from a broking company, you can read their research, but that's a little advanced at the beginning. First, you have to understand what is the industry all about.
Got it, sir. Sir, there were a few questions which were a little stock specific, so I filtered them out to avoid any stock specific discussions. So moving to the last three questions, which we typically ask each and every speaker of ours. So the first thing which we would request you to share any key reading materials which you would recommend, not just from a pharma perspective, but because these candidates are at the budding stage and they're preparing to enter the industry. So any particular reading materials unheard of which you would like to recommend to these young minds?
I mean, in terms of what, not pharma, but in terms of understanding what
Businesses or investing as such.
So there is a book by Seth Klarman you can read. It's a very good book. I mean, that's one book you start reading first. I forgot the name, but I've read it twice or thrice. So it's an amazing book on valuation. It tells you, how to go about understanding and valuing companies. So that's an amazing book. I think you should read books by Peter Lynch and Anthony Bolton. These are the two great analysts, investors of all time. Both of them were from Fidelity. You should read these two guys' books, whichever books you get. I think if you read these three, then I think at least it has given you a good idea of what to do with investing, at least to start with.
Got it, sir. So apart from reading, any particular career advice you'd like to give these young minds?
No, so, I keep telling people here also, at my place, that if you want to be a research analyst, that's the first step. If you want to enter the investment industry, the first thing that you need to do is reading. And I'm not saying read books again all the time, because reading books is one thing. I know you will learn a lot from books, and we should be reading. Even all billionaires talk about it. But I'm talking about if you want to be an investment person, you got to read a lot of balance sheets. You got to read a lot of research. And the reading should not be limited to your office time or your daytime. It has to be a part and parcel of your regular, your day. It has to be a part and parcel of your weekends also. So this is what I try to do all the time. Whenever I get free time, I read, and I read a lot of research, because I'm telling you, the industries are changing so fast that it is very difficult for people to keep abreast of the new developments. So if I stop reading for even 2 months, I may not be uh, as good an investor I was 2 months before, because I missed out so many things. So I think it should be a way of life. Reading research should be a way of life. Reading annual reports, reading about companies should be a way of life. Reading newspapers is another thing. Now, that is a regular thing a lot of people do. But I think spend less time on that. Read more research. Obviously, read the news. This is important. It determines everything about what businesses are doing. But read a lot of research. That is the most important thing that I tell all my employees. That read on weekends, read on your free time, in your train, wherever you are, just start reading research reports, because that will give you an idea as to what is happening in each business. And unless we don't understand what businesses are doing, we can't become investors. We can keep reading 20 books of investing, it is not going to make a difference. We'll just become professors of investing. We will never be investors. So to become investors, we need to know what's happening in businesses. And I'm also very guilty of not reading the way I should be reading sometimes. But if you read a lot of research and if you read a lot about businesses, then your ability to take better decisions every day goes up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So last question. Any any particular mistake which you made in your career you'd want these candidates to avoid?
Lots of them. No, like in terms of investing or what?
Anything, sir, as far as career building goes, or building a career in this investing world.
Mistakes. It's a very general question, actually.
Maybe in terms of learning at the start of investing, maybe you can share something on that side.
No, I think one big learning I've had is in a stock called SRF in 2005, and I remember they have this fluorine manufacturing process, and there's something called Kyoto Protocol, under which European countries had to phase out greenhouse gases over a period of time. They had some targets. And there was something called carbon credits which were being exchanged those days, where European companies who could not phase out greenhouse gases were allowed to buy these credits from companies. So there were 3 Indian companies which benefited from that. One was SRF, one was Navin Fluorine, and the third was Gujarat Fluorine. So in 2005, I saw that as a huge opportunity for SRF. And I went all out to, recommend and whatever, buy that stock. But we made a lot of money initially. The stock went up 4 times or whatever because of this. But one thing I missed out was that this was a short-term opportunity for 3 years. So the learning here was that when you value the businesses, you should value sustainable businesses. And what is not sustainable is only a sum of parts. So something which is not going to be a part of your earnings for next 20 years, do not take it as do not give a multiple to that profit. So we typically, investing community is very lazy. We look at rule of thumb always. So we say PE multiple laga do. 20 times, 30 times, ho gaya. But what is the meaning of the 20, 30 times? It is actually, if you work backwards, it is discounting your cash flows at a particular discount rate. And then, therefore, the derivative of that is 20, 30 times. But sometimes we get carried away with that logic and we say 35 times, 40 times. But I cannot give that multiple to a business which is going to go off my balance sheet in 3 years. Because after 3 years, it's not going to be there. So if you're giving 30 times to a particular profit, and if this business is big and it goes off, you end up giving 70, 80 times, which means that you lose money. So that is one learning I had, where I was valuing non-sustainable business as if it was going to continue, because that particular opportunity went off after 5 years. But obviously, we did not lose money because we were out of the stock. So, but the learning was good.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I think we are just about the time, and would like to thank you for taking out time from your calendar, helping us learn the basics, fundamentals around pharmaceutical sector, and maybe move forward from here. I hope you give us similar opportunity in future to learn from you again, sir. On behalf of entire institute, I'd like to thank you for the time you've given.
Thanks, Rajesh. Thanks a lot.